Okay, well, I've gone long enough. I felt a little pressure to not talk too much. You know, when you're a professor, you learn about things, you want to talk all the time. And I told Bert over here, I said, if we start running too long, I want you to stand up and face the other way, and I'll know that it's time to move on. So I haven't seen Bert move yet, so I'm going to do my little spiel. No, I want to introduce the group. I thought maybe it'd be interesting to have you trace the origins of our group and tell you a little bit about who's been members. Bert alluded to it by the fact that Leroy had been a part of the group, and a very important part. But we actually started in the school year 1962-63. This is when Jim and I were juniors, and the other two members of the quartet at that time, the Boards Quartet, were Mark Miller and Leroy. And you know, do you all remember the music contests that we used to have in the springtime? You know, you'd have the flute trio and the instrumentals, and you'd have the mixed chorus and the girls' glee club and so forth. Well, every school had a boys' quartet, and so the four of us were the boys' quartet. And so we produced a song for the contest, but we found that we enjoyed singing other things. There were so many other great musical things to learn and to listen and to appreciate and to sing. And so we continued to sing. Well, we felt like as we started performing these things at school dances and at church services and so forth, we felt we needed a name. And it turned out that the name Westside 4 comes from the fact that Mark and Leroy and Jim and I were all living on the west side of Orange City. So, and groups like the Brothers Four, the Kingston Trio, you know, you had to have something with four in it. So we were the Westside Four. So that's where the name comes from. So Mark and Leroy graduated. Mark went to West Point. Leroy went to Northwestern. Okay, so now Jim and I are seniors. So that's where we added Nolan and Larry Van Sickle. Okay, his dad had the village, you know, and so the four of us were the Westside Four in our senior year at MOC. Okay, so now we graduate. Larry goes to the University of Iowa to become a pharmacist. Jim, Nolan, and I go to Northwestern. Who's there? Leroy. Okay, so we had sung together before, and Leroy, meanwhile, his freshman year, went out and bought a 4-string baritone ukulele. And he was always kind of the motivator in our group to say, well, let's try other things. And he had started learning some of the chords to popular music at that time. And he said, you know, maybe we ought to try instruments. So Nolan and Jim bought a guitar. Okay, well, that left me. Well, what am I going to play? Well, we noticed that most groups needed to have one of these bass fiddles. So Northwestern, very kindly, or Britzman, said, yeah, use it whenever you need it. And so I sort of inherited that, and that was my toy to deal with. And so we started singing. Back in those days, there were events that were done by the college. Folk music was sort of at its peak in the mid-'60s. You know, it sort of died out when the Beatles and the Rolling Stones showed up later in that decade. But in the mid-'60s, it was very popular. And we sang at a variety of things. We went on the road with Fred Busey. Remember him? He was a college pastor at Northwestern. I remember we took a trip to Denver. There was our RCYF. You remember those things? For those of you that was at Central College, and they invited groups from each of the Reformed Church colleges. So we drove down. We were reminded today. My parents had a '62 Ford. We put my bass at the time between us. In the car, and the rest of us were squeezed like this on the side to make room for the bass. And so we sang at different things. We did this for 2 years or so. It was about, my guess, and Ron, you can connect me if I'm wrong. I think it was probably the latter month or so of 1965, or the first month or so of 1966, that Leroy learned of the leukemia that he had, which at that time was incurable. You know, to their credit, the Orange City Lions Club heard about this, and they put up some money, came to us and said, we want you to go to Minneapolis. We found a recording studio there. We want you to record a dozen or so of your favorite songs and make them a variety of things. And that's what we did in April of 1966. Leroy, meanwhile, was getting more and more sick, and eventually in July of 1966, we lost him. So I look at this event tonight of us singing here as being an opportunity for us to have a reunion. We had a great time. We've had 3-week-long weekend practices where they come to Orange City, and we just had a blast singing together after all those decades. But I want to bring special tribute to Leroy Netton, who, as I said, was really sort of the inspirational leader of our group and got us to think beyond ourselves and to broaden and so forth. And I know that there are several members of his family. Ron is in the class of '66. I've already talked with him. And Marlis, are you there somewhere? Marlis Hop, there, she's in the back. Marlis Hop, his sister is here. Ken is here. And was Al able to make it? Al, there's Al Denton. And we were at Al Denton's house. We stayed at his house when we recorded in '66 in Minneapolis. Leroy was such a great guy, and so we look at this as being a sort of a memorial tribute to this guy as well. I love what you guys did with your candles here and remembering. It's so important to remember those people who are important. Leroy Netton to this group is so important, so kudos to him. The next song, you can't do a reunion without remembering, right? I mean, reunions are all about remembering. We have a song on our album called Try to Remember. And so we want to do that one for you. It was popularized, it was actually a part of an off-Broadway musical called The Fantastics, and it was recorded by a number of groups, including the Brothers Four, who we sort of patterned our style after. Try to remember.
Cable. Those of you who play guitar know that that would have been a major error. Got it. Okay. Okay, could we start again? Forget that. Try to remember, Jim. It says right here, start parts on ooh.
Try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember the kind of September when you were tender and callow fellow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Try to remember when life was so tender and no one wept except the willow. Try to remember the kind of September when love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, our hearts will remember the fire of September that made us melt. Deep in December,